Today, we're going to talk about observability and the age of agentic AI. Let's start with the big picture. What does agentic AI actually mean when applied to infrastructure and data systems instead of just chatbots and copilots?
Yeah, so again, great question, Josue. I think when we think about AI in the world of data engineering, there is the first step that we're all familiar with, which is maybe the AI assistants or copilots that really help engineers generate code, troubleshoot issues, suggesting PR, maybe fixes, and even broader explainability and discovery of how the data and pipelines all behave together. Um, this is very important and very helpful for data engineering today. It's a huge step forward. But when we think about agentic, we take it one step even further, which is how AI agents not only complement and accelerate data engineers, but actually um, do those operations much more autonomously. So, how do they operate pipelines, detect issues, remediate them, optimize them, evolve them, upgrade, do code changes, logic changes, and eventually even build pipelines all together. Now, again, it's of course it's a journey, it's an arc. We start with maybe assistive, we start with recommendation, then we move to much more assistive, and we'll then have semi-autonomously and a human in the loop type of agents. And of course, the end and the holy grail is how do we do that all autonomously? But that's where we are moving towards. It's not just another interface for engineers uh, to ask questions and generate better code and get some answers, but it's really something that does it much more autonomously at scale.
Many teams like the idea of self-healing data systems. Now, I know that's a lot of marketing out there around that. But the question then for you is why do so few actually have this self-healing data systems, especially when, well, I think teams are desperate for that type of help.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's data engineering in that sense is not unique in the world of AI, where there are a lot of cool demos and prototypes out there, and then getting this to production to actually work at scale in a meaningful way is very very challenging. Specifically, if we think about data engineering, I think it has three uh, very specific challenges that actually prevent agentic or self-healing system being so prevalent, even though, as you mentioned, they're very, very much needed. It's about context. It's about the deterministic versus probabilistic approach, and it's about the actual control of pipelines and validation of outcomes. And let me explain a little bit on each of those. When we think about context, um, in order for agents to be able to understand the root cause of issues, to be able to generate fixes or PRs or suggestions for optimizations that relate specifically to the specific pipeline or task within the pipeline that you're referring to, um, they actually need to have the full context. They need to understand the full stack of data, pipeline, execution, lineage, infrastructure, and how all of these are operating contextually together in production, and of course over time. Um, Without having all of that full stack very very deeply, it's very hard to generate something meaningful. And the easy example for that is, if you're traveling to Paris next week and you're asking your favorite model for a recommendation for a dinner and a show, um, the model will at best look at some online reviews and what's actually available next week, and provide some general recommendations. But without knowing your specific dietary restriction and cultural preferences and what hotel you're staying at and what time do you actually arrive and what the rest of your schedule for the evening looks like, it will be very hard to generate a recommendation that will apply to you. Go to this specific restaurant with potentially this menu option, and right immediately after go to this show that's right near next door. So having this context is important. The problem is today that most of the tools out there in the platforms there are having very narrow view on one of those elements in the stack, not across all of it. A lot of it is not production aware, a lot of it is not real time. So it's very, very hard to actually get some meaningful operation or suggestion from the models of the agents without this context. I think secondly, and you start touching on this, there are different type of issues that data engineers deal with when they operate with pipeline. There are data quality and data distribution issues, schema changes. There are pipeline SLAs and failures and pipeline operation or health issues. And there are infrastructure issues, like for instance, out of memory failures. Each of those examples I just gave, and of course there are multiple other ones, actually require different level of sophistication and depth in order to root cause and remediate them. Some of those may require a simple configuration change. Some of those may require an actual deeper code or even logic change. Some of them are not dependent on do not require your changes as the owner of the pipeline, and maybe require some upstream change, and maybe there was some data contract that was broken. So those are things that you cannot control. So expecting agents to miraculously going to solve this require different level of sophistication, different level of understanding of the end-to-end system and ability to touch each of those elements. And lastly, I would say agents need to be able to, in order for us to actually close the loop and be able to produce true self-healing, self-remediating, self-optimizing systems, we need those agents to close the loop by controlling the execution and validating them themselves, or at least the operation. That's very, very hard. Typically today, a lot of the systems out there are looking at the pipelines outside, the data outside in, so they can potentially monitor some outputs after the fact. But it's very, very hard to do that when you're trying to validate at every step of the way in real time, both in terms of outputs and execution and performance. Secondly, they don't really control the execution. So it's very, very hard to make something actionable if you cannot control it and if you cannot actually validate it. And to your point, you'll end up with a sprawl of agents doing a lot of things, but without validation, it's just going to introduce much greater risk versus actually potentially solving our data engineering problems.
It's a trust issue. You have to have a trust issue with what's going to be happening with that great power of, like, okay, you're just letting things run around and see what happens to your customers' data.
With great power comes great responsibility. I think I keep saying that
Yeah.
in every conversation I have in the past few months.
Yeah. What happens when agents start generating hundreds of jobs a week?
Again, that's on the one hand, the dream. You have agents that produce hundreds of jobs a week, and all of a sudden, every analyst and data scientist and analytics engineer can we are getting to a democratization of data much faster. And on the other hand, all of a sudden, your infrastructure and data engineering team are, hey, let's hope that nothing breaks today. I think it just reinforces our discussion around the ability to validate and the ability to have guardrails at the agent level, meaning we need agents to not only generate a proposal and go and execute, but we need those agents or adjacent agents to be able to validate the result of that and quickly and automatically remediate the actual fix. Now, I think it's even going to be stronger or even mandatory to do all of that before you deploy to production. Because the last thing that you want is hundreds of new pipelines or jobs or fixed jobs per week or PRs deploy in production and then half of them fail or collapse your jobs. So the ability to do all of that in pre-prod, not based on static root code analysis, not based on small data sampling, not based on just looking at the final output of the tables, but actually do step-by-step validation in pre-prod on real live big size data. I think that's the key here in terms of how do we ensure that we have the right guardrails.
I think I it's interesting, right? It's you on one hand, the idea of hundreds and thousands of agents doing things is something that I think is heavily sold in the AI hype cycle, which could have good validity, to be honest. However, on one hand, you can have thousands of agents that can be giving you great labor savings. But on the flip side, too, I think of just because there's so much with agentic AI is so much there's so much trial and error. I'm like, look, is it even financially feasible for an organization to be running truly autonomous agentic systems at that scale unless you are, to your point, not waiting after the fact to evaluate if something is good or not, but preemptively evaluating it.
Yeah, and I think look, the most advanced teams that we are seeing today, even with human written code, or semi, because who doesn't use AI today when they write code? But even today, do validation of code changes before they deploy to production. And I'm not talking about the you know traditional stress testing and regression testing, or again some local validation. I'm talking about true automated validation in very deep granular level. I think having agents generating pipelines or generating fixes autonomously, you're just gonna amplify that 100x, and you just need to make sure that your validation framework is very, very robust and airtight.
The savings on compute, the savings on tokens, and all that is, I think, pretty significant if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
What is or where is the real threshold between assistive AI and truly agentic autonomous AI?
Yeah, I think it's an arc, right? And it's a journey. It's not necessarily a clear cut. Um, I think maybe 5 years ago, data engineering was way behind the times in terms of monitoring and alerting. And I think we caught up in that sense that today a lot of folks already have some type of monitoring. Oftentimes it's not deep enough, it doesn't have enough coverage, it's not maybe real time, but at least we have something. But it's monitoring, it's after the fact, it's reactive. And the big problem today is that data engineering teams, data platform teams are just swamped with alerts. We get this alert fatigue where I get, hundreds of alerts per day, and like, where should I focus my time? Should I even ignore it? And I wake up in the morning and I see, a bunch of alerts in Slack or PagerDuty, and like, should I even bother, or should I just go on with my day? And until someone else is yelling at me, I'm fine. Um, I think when we talk about assistive, we're talking about how do we increase the velocity of my development or my troubleshooting or my operation, and it's becoming easier for me to work, but I still have to do the work. When we think about agentic and in actionability in that sense, it's not only do I get an assistant or get a recommendation that again essentially accelerates or streamlines my root cause analysis or my general analysis, and then my code generation activities, that is again still very actionable, to something that does all of that for me. And all of a sudden I'm moving from I need to do things on my own to I need to make sure that they operate at scale. I need to potentially be the balance and checks at some point in time on the critical paths. And I need to be the domain expert. So I think the idea is, again, this is where we start with data engineers being the domain expert of, they know the space that they are working in, they know the logic, they know the business logic, they know the business or product requirements that they need uh, to implement, right? And at the end of the day, deliver. But with all that sprawl of infrastructure, they became much more of an day-to-day operation type of people that need to just make sure that we plug the holes before something breaks. And I think assistants, uh, recommendations and actionability, and later on agentic will get us back to where data engineering is much more domain expert than just making sure that we, the Dutch boy that was flooding the dam before everything collapses.
Yeah, and I would say my take on this, I think it's a little bit slightly different, and that is, I think that, and I alluded to this, or I made this analogy when I did my interview with Matei, the CTO and co-founder of Databricks, and I think that the line between assistive and truly agentic or autonomous, it really is going to be a matter of the ROI of, hey, if I can do this with an agentic system and it costs me $2 million in mistakes a year, but the flip side to that is it is generating $20 million in revenue a year, and let's say it doesn't really represent that much of a problem with my customers when I do make that big mistake, then I would say if you feel very confident that you'll win much more than you'll lose, I think for me that becomes a threshold that people can start measuring today.
Yeah, you're right in terms of the risk tolerance. I would assume that again there are areas where, or even specific focus area or environments within every organization's environment that they cannot tolerate uh, even a small amount of non predictability or downtime or errors to your point. And I think it becomes a matter of like where do we want to essentially tolerate that risk versus you know where are we willing to pay the price in order for us to move much faster and potentially again generate bigger upside.
Why should cost optimization and performance tuning be embedded in the system instead of being left to clean up and postmortems?
Yeah, so as with anything with code and engineering and software development, if you fix it while you build, it's probably a 1x, and if you fix it a little bit after, it's 10x, and if you fix it when you try to fix something when it's in production, it's 100x effort. So the more shift left we can have it here, the better. I think the big problem is that today cost doesn't just become an after fact. It's an after effect because we don't have any way to affect it to begin with or be proactive around it. Meaning, today, at best, most teams just look at their cost dashboard and say, oh, last week or last month, my cost spiked. And now they're trying to realize, okay, where did it come from and why? And even if I know the pipelines or the workspaces that maybe jumped in cost, do I know why? And maybe it's for a good reason. Maybe all of a sudden I processed more data, and maybe all of a sudden I changed code or added more pipelines, but maybe I didn't. And they don't even know how to pinpoint that. So I think, as with anything, if you want to tackle the underlying issues, be proactive about it and be able to actually affect it before it becomes an issue, not to mention when it's already an issue, how to fix it at scale. You need something that's deeply embedded into the system, that's part of your day-to-day pipeline operation, that can track it in a very deep way and can then generate meaningful insights. Because when you look at things after the fact, typically the insights that you can generate are not as meaningful. You probably don't have the granularity level that you need. And oftentimes what we see data engineers do is just run the pipeline again with some type of change or some type of logic or some types of logs that they need in order to just reproduce the issue. Where if you already had it in to begin with, you already have everything that you need. So just a way of saying you need those guardrails embedded to be proactive and actually drive meaningful value. We see teams today struggle with cost optimization because they don't have the right visibility and insight that they need there.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, like, let's face it, the reality is in most companies, how cost optimizations happen is you wait till your CFO says you're getting a massive bill, or why the heck are we spending so much on this one platform or this other platform? And then you go optimize once, go do some changes like you're saying, do some trial and error, spend more money on that trial and error, and then you change things up, and it's going to be out of order unless you have a very sophisticated FinOps team. And then if you have a very sophisticated FinOps team, that's probably going to cost you a lot of money, maybe saving you a lot of money too on the flip side. But nonetheless, the more months that you can start saving up that money adds up. So
Yeah, and I think today, just maybe a couple anecdotes that might give it a little bit more flavor. One, I just spoke to the head of product of data platform at Disney a couple of months ago, who kind of mentioned how they used to have what he called SOS projects for cost optimizations once every little while, and again all of a sudden they cost spiked, and how embedding guardrails inside the system that are uh, really an integral part of that really helped them on that. I think the other piece that we are seeing today, folks know, just finished 2025, that in 2026 going into 2027 they'll have an explosion of use case workloads, data. I think we mentioned AI at some point in this conversation, but they're probably going to do something around that. They go to their CFO and they already want to secure an infra cost growth, and there's no budget. And all of a sudden, it's not only optimizations for I just want to save money, but it's I literally don't have enough capacity to support my business. And what do I do? And I need to cut, or do I need to optimize? And I think just doing that. So the angle that I want to share, one of the teams that we work with um, managed within 1 quarter to make significant cost optimization outcomes on the realize actual cost optimization on their platform. Within 2 sprints, they already filled all of that cost saving that they've done for a full quarter with new workloads. It just shows you the speed that we work in today, and the I think demand for additional capacities are so big that if you're not actively and proactively optimizing and make sure that your pipelines are efficient, you're just going to get blocked, whether it's with growth or whether it's with, again, actual bottom line. To wrap this point up, I think, maybe last year we saw a lot of teams really focused on cost optimization, and still are for 2026, because it's really a priority. It's becoming from a VP of data platform, data engineering perspective, to a CIO, CTO perspective, to a CFO perspective, to now maybe potentially a board perspective because of the magnitude. I think we're seeing teams more and more today just looking to really do more with what they already have, because they already secured the budget. So now it's like, how do I generate more business value? And I think this is the key. And this is where, we want to enable those teams to deliver more value with what they have. And I think that's the way that we approach it, and the way that I think our most maybe advanced team that we work with do.
what is the biggest myth people have about agentic AI, and what's a hard truth they need to before trying to implement it?
Yeah, I think it's really coming back to this maybe first question that we had today, which is, you can't just take whatever it is that you do have today, code from Git or anything else that you maybe potentially already monitor, or your current CI/CD system, just throw it into a model, build a quick agent on top of it, and just expect it to magically work wonders across your system. I'll share another anecdote from a team that we work with that actually presented it publicly. They tried to have a simple agent that helps them figure out failures on their Spark system. So what they did is essentially threw the failure logs into the model, and asked it to generate some PRs for, or suggested PR for remediation. And of course, what I got was very generic results that had nothing to do with what actual production looked like, that had nothing, no consideration for how the data behaves, no consideration for how the performance of those jobs were. And I think the number there was around, again, naively, it was around 95% not accurate, so 5% accuracy. Now, even if you can drive that to 75% not accurate, so 25% accuracy, well, who would want these type of agents to be in production? I think that, again, that's the big chasm of, it might look great in a quick demo, and you throw it into Claude Code or Cursor or whatever it is that you're using, and it looks great, and you have a prompt and like ask it some questions, and then you have some suggestions. But if you want it to work at scale with the, as we talked about earlier, the right risk tolerance, it's something that worked end to end. You can't just plug in what you have to do. You need to have a robust infrastructure behind you that tracks the context, that can control it, and can validate itself before you actually deploy.